guys, let's start in the rebuild section of this exercise. Josh, give us your rebuild trade for candidate.
Well, I feel like first things first, you need to trade for draft picks. I just want to go ahead and say that you're wanting draft picks. Higher the better, but first, second, third. Anything before, after that, pretty much worthless to you. So package all of those into first, seconds, and thirds somehow, some way. If you can sneak in a third on a trade, do it. But trade away your players that you don't think have longevity. And you know that. You know who you like. You know who you don't. That's what fantasy football is about. You're not supposed to sit here and be like, oh, well, technically, Najee Harris, he could be good next year. I'm not saying trade away Najee Harris. I'm just saying hypothetically, if you wanted to, do what you got to do. Now, someone I think you should trade for is Calvin Ridley. So he's going to be a bit pricier with that recent trade to Jacksonville, but it's clear that Ridley is going to be the huge focus in this offense that is lacking a wide receiver one. I think you can get him for under a first-round pick. I don't think you need to throw one of those at it. You want to hold on to that anyway, and the whole point of tanking is to have a better draft pick. So maybe a second, maybe some other pieces that you don't like. Maybe you can get Ridley in there. I just feel like he needs to be a part of your rebuild strategy, especially he's suspended for the year. You trade him to one of those teams that's contending right now or wants to contend. And I think that that's a really good move for both teams because Calvin Ridley's burning on their bench and you're sitting there like, I need next year. So find yourself a Calvin Ridley.
I like
Good
that.
Call. Good call.
So, I mean, basically, before I get into mine, like, I know when I like to rebuild teams, what do you guys think? When is it time to rebuild your team? When you're 4 or 5 pieces away, when your team's past a certain age on average, or what?
I think both of those factors come into it, but I think the biggest thing is record and just seeing the depth fall apart. Because there's a lot of teams that I have this year that just the depth just fell apart as injuries happened, as bye weeks hit. I saw my team just kind of dwindle a bit, and you're just kind of like, you're 1-7. I mean, what are you going to do?
For me, it's how bad am I losing? Like if I'm like 9th place, if I'm losing by 5 points, 6, 10 points, there's still a chance that my team can turn it around. If I'm getting blown the hell out weekly and it's just like my pieces are just not playing, it's time to rebuild. It's clearly not going to make a difference what I do this season. It's clearly time to change things up. The players that I may have fallen in love with before the season aren't really panning out. That's time when it's time for me.
I like that too. And I mean, you have to be careful because like with injuries and stuff, you can have a really good team that gets injured that's still going to be competitive for many years. So you have to kind of manage that. So just because your record is down in certain ways, you can kind of chalk that up to bad luck, roll the same team into next year too. So just because you have a bad record doesn't mean you have to tear everything down and rebuild it. But when you have a team that just absolutely needs to be rebuilt, I mean, I took over an orphan team earlier and I had Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, and nothing else. I had Kyle Pitts too. So I tore everything down. I traded up. I think I have like 7 or 8 first-round picks in the next 3 years on that one and added some really good pieces too. So I like to keep track of the average age of my team. So you can even make an Excel spreadsheet. I've done this before. Go through, put your skill position players in there and just see what the average age of your team is. If you're pushing 27, 28 years old, probably time for a rebuild on that one. So keep them young. Keep it like 24, 25, 26 even, kind of right in that range. That's kind of the sweet spot. But a guy that I'm trading for pretty much everywhere as of right now is Michael Pittman. Everything that's going on in Indy plus what he's done recently, his value is very low. If you can acquire, I traded Christian Kirk and I got Pittman in a second rounder back in return for him.
How?
The guy thought that Pittman was going down and Kirk had a good game last week. I mean, that's how dumb people are in fantasy or in dynasty.
Recency bias, especially.
The recency bias is huge. So capitalize on that because you have Michael Pittman on your team. He's 25 years old. Say they do tank and get the first round pick, get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young in there. Michael Pittman's talented as hell. So you put that in there, you got a great start to your rebuild, and you do have a wide receiver one for the future.
I agree with that. Another player that's kind of in that vein, even though Josh doesn't want to talk about him, is Kyle Pitts. If ever he gets an actual quarterback in there, they might have, a similar ascension as Michael Pittman. For me, before I get into my players, I just want to say, like, I was talking to you all about this almost exact situation. I was 2-5, And I was like 1 week away from just saying, I need to just tank this team out. And this team is loaded, as you all might probably know. And I just was like, I need to tank this thing out. But then I kind of like actually looked at the full picture of my team. I had scored the third most points in the entire league. It's 12-man league, scored the third most points. And I was just sitting at 2-5. And I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I should just chill. Like, this is not as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be. It's not a full out tank process. Like, I'm still in these games. I could have beaten many of the other teams that were going on in that week, for the 5 games that I was losing. So, you just kind of got to know when you're rebuilding and when you're not. This team is not a rebuild team. It's just happened to be that the record and the fantasy football gods were against it. But, maybe it's turning things around. But all in all, my 2 people to play for or to trade for if you're on a rebuilding team. First one is Khalil Herbert for the Chicago Bears. David Montgomery is not going to be re-signed there next season. I think it's an off chance that he's probably the RB1 there, and they may not draft another player because they just got Tristan Ebner in there, and they might just see what they got with them being the top 2 guys. Bears, I think, Joe, we can all consider running back probably not one of the biggest issues on the Bears team, with the O-line and the wide receivers.
Who hasn't played a snap.
Right. And so I think that, going after Khalil Herbert, you have a chance at an actual RB1, and the person that has Khalil Herbert on their team right now is still getting it split with David Montgomery. So if you can trade for him, trade something that they might actually be able to use in a more prominent role, I think you're going to be able to pull that trade off. My other one is Tony Pollard. He has just been better than Zeke this entire season. The person with Tony Pollard may be a little bit apprehensive, but with Zeke coming back, those points maybe not, always going to be the biggest, and I'm assuming this person's probably making either a championship run or a playoff push that has Tony Pollard. They might be willing to give him up if you can give them a piece that they consider something they can use. I'm not saying like Kenneth Walker or Damian Pierce, nothing crazy like that, but if you trade him a Cordarrelle Patterson, for example, or somebody that, that you can trade them that they can make a run with, and there's old versus somebody who's younger, Tony Pollard, who is, I think, 25 or 26, that I think you could still is going to be usable because I don't think Zeke is long for this Cowboys roster.
I don't mean to rain on your parade, but nobody's going to accept Cordell Patterson for Tony Pollard, especially after
you'd have to add some stuff to it.
For sure. No, I completely agree on the Khalil Herbert because I don't think people know that Montgomery's contract's up. I think people think that this is a split backfield for the long term. Obviously, some people can do the research. It's all on the internet right there, just at the fingertips of anyone. But someone who has Herbert has seen him just kind of dwindle. And yeah, he's done well whenever Montgomery, they think of him as a backup though right now. And yeah, he's kind of trending to split carries, but like at the same time, he's a running back 1 next year. I mean, at least in the conversation. So
yeah,
Montgomery's not going back to Chicago. So
no, I got 2 things here. So guys, look at the 2023 free agent running backs or tight ends or wide receivers. Try to find one that is not thought of very highly right now. Put in a low offer for it. Get him on your team. If he signs at the right place, it's a huge boost to your team. Highly recommend doing that. And Billy, you were talking about your 2-5 team that you were about to blow up. That's a very real thing. I mean, we do this. We're in a lot of dynasty leagues. We're in a lot of fantasy leagues in general. And even we panic a little bit sometimes. So you get some of these guys that are just very emotional about their teams. Capitalize on the panic, especially if you're in a rebuild. You can absolutely clean up and do that. The panic is real.
The panic.
Capitalize on the panic of others as well and see what they're willing to offer and see what they want. If you could throw a 2nd-round pick and end up with a good guy, heck yeah, man, you got a little extra piece to your roster. So
I capitalized on the panic and I got Tyreek Hill out of it. So boom.
I mean, it's a good point. Also, I mean, if you especially are in super flex league, start looking at potential quarterbacks that might be moving. Jordan Love comes to mind from Green Bay. I don't really see how much longer they can sit on a 1st-round quarterback that's never played. He might get a chance to play somewhere else. That might just be somebody you could go after, and I'm guaranteeing the person that has Jordan Love will give him away. He might even be on waivers in some leagues just because he's probably never thought to have been actually seeing the field.
Yeah, I don't know. In super flex, he's probably rostered, but at the same time, someone who has him isn't seeing him as a starting quarterback right now, so you should be able to. Yeah, so completely agree.